I'm Dr. Mo Gelbart. I'm the Director of Behavioral Health at Torrance Memorial Medical Center and the Executive Director of the Thel McMillan Recovery Center. And so I'm really happy to be here, very grateful to be asked. And, whenever I do these talks, especially to parents, I feel it's my responsibility to make sure you get meaningful and useful information. If you can walk away with one thing that you say, I can do that. I can try working on that. Then I feel I've done my job. So today's talk is on children and teens, stress and anxiety, and how parents can help. So let's talk about anxiety first. We're going to relate this somewhat to the COVID pandemic, but anxiety, even before, as we all know, has been extremely prevalent. The bad news is anxiety is the most prevalent mental health problem there is. The good news is it's the most treatable problem of all the mental health issues. And pandemic has changed the landscape regarding anxiety. And there's no clear signs yet of this lessening. In fact, we're in the middle of a surge, and as you all know and see the news, and I see in the hospital itself, the hospitals are exploding and they're at real critical place right now. So certainly raises a lot of people's anxiety. The things that kids have identified as anxiety producing are still there, except and those in the new areas of concern have real consequences, on our minds and our bodies. Bottom line, we're facing a national mental health crisis that's going to result, I think, most people believe, in some serious health and mental and physical and social consequences for years to come. I think, if we know people who have been through the Depression, for example, they talk, years later, your grandparents or whatever may be saying, oh yeah, in the Depression, they still not suffer from it, but they still have behaviors that are related to it. They may be watching, I know people who are multimillionaires, but still be real careful about their money because they went through the Depression. And, I have a feeling we're going to be seeing a lot of that 20 years from now. The people who, those of us and our kids who have gone through the pandemic here, maybe they'll be hoarding toilet paper or something, but we're going to see, but in a more immediate, we're going to probably have a lot of what we call post-traumatic stress disorder, which is one of the forms of anxiety. So there's no question that the pandemic is impacting lives and continue to do so, and it disrupts work and education, healthcare, the economy, relationships. The magnitude of it is hard to fathom. More than 350,000 people dead, more than, combination of multiple wars and so on. Stress and trauma for families, and especially those who are experiencing illness or death in their illness, or recovering from, the long hauler syndrome and the sequelae from the having had the virus. We see people dealing with finance problems, job loss, uncertain futures. As I say, the long-term consequence for our kids is I think, merits concern. I don't want to get too negative about it, but it certainly merits concern. We're seeing the highest levels of stress, depression, anxiety, suicidal ideation, substance abuse among adults and teens. The self-help lines, the suicide hotlines, the free counseling hotlines are just jammed with 4, 5, 6 times as many calls as they've ever had. And then on top of COVID, if that's not enough, we have what's going on in the country right now. The post-election trauma the divided nation. We have fires, hurricanes, climate. I mean, it almost feels like something out of a movie. So there's an awful lot to deal with, an awful lot of stress, and it causes anxiety. So that's what we're going to primarily talk about today. The goal for today, for me, is what is anxiety? What does it look like? What are the sources of anxiety? And the most important, which we'll spend hopefully most of the time, is what can we do? What can we do for ourselves? What can we do for our children? So we'll start with what is anxiety. Everybody, it's worry, fear, nervousness, concern. Everybody experiences anxiety. And anxiety is not always bad. It's actually sometimes very positive. It goes on a continuum of, minimal to very severe. It's normal for children to have anxiety that come and go throughout their entire life. And generally what kids do is they have anxious new experiences, they encounter new situations, they learn about it, they work with it, they work through it, and then they get used to it. It helps motivate people. You know, when you're anxious, you wind up, you know, perhaps preparing better or making sure all your ducks are in order. It helps you worry about things that are out on the horizon that might be dangerous, and then we make plans on how to cope with things. So anxiety is not, in and of itself, purely negative. Let's look at some of the typical anxieties for, based on age groups. And I'm going to try this. It's a little, between my technical challenges and this thing, we'll do our best. I'm going to try to put a one. Hopefully, let me see. Is there a slide up? Okay. So forget these three. Let's just look at typical fears by age. Infants and toddlers generally have fear of separation, fear of strangers, fear of loud noises. Ages 2 to 3, animals, darkness, fire, water, thunder, lightning. Those are things that cause anxiety in little kids, little infants. When you get to 4 and 5, it's bugs, getting lost, monsters. For those that have little children, I have a four-year-old grandchild and a 2-year-old grandchild, and I just spent a week with them away after we quarantined and did all the right things and got tested, blah, blah. But anyway, I couldn't believe every night they're running around, monsters coming, scary people coming, So it's a very common fear, as I say. I got a good taste of it in this last week. 5 to 7, germs, illness, school, natural disasters. Okay, to 7 to 12, performance anxiety, social situations, burglars, war. Let me get off the screen here. And so, when anxiety, and all those things I just described on that chart are normal. Those are normal anxieties that kids go through, they feel, and basically get through. However, when it's severe, when it goes along the continuum and gets to the severe end, it can be pretty crippling and pretty damaging and very impactful on one's day-to-day life. Another problem with the fact that everybody has anxiety is sometimes we don't understand or can't relate to someone else's crippling type of anxiety. So for example, we all get on an airplane, maybe have a little anxiety, but most of us get on an airplane. So when somebody says, I can't get on an airplane, I just can't walk on, we can't relate to it very well because we just say, well, just get on, it's no big deal. More people die in the freeway than are plane. We begin to talk to people that way as if we can logically, rationally talk them out of their fears. But again, that's one of the downsides of the fact that we all have anxiety at some point. As far as our kids go, keep in mind, most kids will outgrow those anxieties I just listed. Most kids will get through them, and with some degree of positive parenting and understanding, they won't be problematic. I want to look at anxiety a different way right now, just 3 components of what goes into anxiety. There are stressors, which are things out in the environment. There are thought processes, which is how we think about those things. And there are physical feelings, which are, heart racing and sweating and lightheadedness. And these are 3 different components of anxiety. Let me give you an example. I use public speaking, which is one of the most anxiety-producing events that we all have on a day-to-day basis. I still feel anxious. I've probably done 500 talks at least, and I get a little tinge of anxiety, but it's more of that positive anxiety, which is it motivates me to do something. But let me just use as an example. So I have a talk to give. That's the stressor. Then I have thoughts about the talk. What if I don't do well? What if people don't like what I have to say? What if I stumble? What if I don't forget what I have to say? So I go through my thinking process, and then my body reacts. I start having my heart races. I sweat. I get lightheaded. And then I feel myself getting those, and I start thinking more. Oh my gosh, what's happening to me now? And I go into this whole anxiety cycle. And we can intervene at any of those 3 places. So for example, the stressor is giving a talk. I could say, you know what? I'm not going to give the talk. Okay, so I can cut that out. Not the best solution, by the way. The most important one is the second. How am I thinking about it? And that's where I, as a psychologist, spend most of my time, but it's helping people change the way we see things, change our view, and basically it's change our thinking from seeing the glasses half full to seeing the glasses, from the glasses half empty to seeing the glasses half full. And then the last is we can deal with the physical. We can learn relaxation, we can learn mindfulness, we can learn meditation, we can exercise. And if things get really bad on the severe end of anxiety, we can get medication. There's good medication for anxiety, and it helps. And as soon as we break this cycle, we can begin dealing with the anxiety. So you can break the cycle at any of the stressor, thinking, or physical activities. So let's look a little deeper into each, and primarily for your children. So what are the stressors they encounter? School, getting good grades, their future, popularity with their friends, getting bullied, how they look. The parents, it's huge, especially with social media. You know, your kids are taking hundreds of photos of themselves before they feel confident enough to post one online. Doing well in sports, doing well in extracurricular activities, having to deal with pressures of drugs and alcohol presented to them, maybe home issues, parents fighting, parents having issues, parents having financial issues, parents are ill as a result of COVID. And COVID is taking away a lot of the coping mechanisms that we use. Not seeing friends and family as much, isolated. Kids are bored, not motivated. I'm sure many of you are experiencing some of that. You know, the distance learning is becoming, you know, the school district and the teachers are doing a great job, but it is wearing on people at this point. Finances, job, parent issues, I said, you know, very serious issues are kids who are having any kind of abuse at home by not going to school. Teachers and the counselors are not seeing it. You know, I run the drug and alcohol program at Torrance Memorial Hospital. We have a teen program. We've been there for 30 years. Most of our issues, most of our problem kids come because the teachers have some sense of problems that are going on that they see in the classroom, and they identify it and they address it, and we work with them. With the kids not being in school, a lot of that is not occurring. So lots of problems that the kids go through are not being seen, and again, the more serious the problems are, the more difficult it is without having the intervention of, you know, the teachers do a great job of being frontline problem identifiers and solvers. So let's take a look at the thinking part of this, which, as I said, so those are stressors. As I said, there's three parts. The thought part, the thinking. You know, our minds are geared to, you know, we're through evolution, we have developed higher level brains. But originally, we had brains that dealt only with the situation as it was. You know, you've all heard probably of the fight or flight response. And what that really basically meant, you know, the caveman would walk through the jungle, not thinking very much, maybe just trying to get the food he needs for that day. And all of a sudden, a tiger jumps in front of him, and now his mind has only to deal with, am I going to run or am I going to fight? That's the only two choices they had. And his body would react instantly, heart races, blood rushes from the extremities into the hearts to provide more blood, probably, you know, urinates and defecates to just relieve his belly of having any kind of digestive issues, and he's just ready to deal with that tiger. And he takes off, he runs, he's not thinking about a lot of things, he's not thinking about his family back home and what's going to happen to them. He runs up a tree, the tiger goes away, and he comes back to normal. And that's how we have survived. That fight or flight ability that we have has helped us survive. But here's the problem. As our brains have developed, we now can think about stress. We don't have to have a tiger in front of us. And our bodies go through the same problem, even whether the stress is real or not. Maybe the best example I could give you is, you know, you're driving down the street and you look in your rearview mirror and you see a police car and the lights go on. And you go, oh no. And you tighten the wheels a little, your hands on the wheel, and your heart races, and you start thinking, oh my God, he's going to pull me over, and I'm going to get a ticket, and my insurance is going to go up, and this is my second ticket, and you go through all the what ifs, and I'll get to that in a moment. And then the police car passes you and goes on and chases the person in front of you, and now you go, I feel better, I'm okay. But that fight or flight response that you have created in your mind, merely with your thinking, has physical impact on you, has anxiety impact on you. So we create our own anxiety with our thinking as a result. And I call it the what if syndrome. We're constantly catastrophizing. What if I get sick? What if I get COVID? Well, what if I get it and I give it to my family? What if we all get sick? What if one of us winds up in the hospital? What if I wind up on a ventilator? And we go through this what if, and before we know it, we're either not alive or we're living under the freeway in a cardboard box, or however we get to something. And so that's called catastrophizing. And the cure, so to speak, is take a breath and relax and change what if to what is, to deal with what is, because what is what's occurring in the present. And again, I'm going to get into that a little bit more when I get into some of the solution related things. But right now, just the third area of anxiety is physical reactions, as I said. And so sweat, heart racing, lightheadedness. And again, we can deal with that through either medication in the most extreme form, or with relaxation and exercise and meditation and so on. So anxiety has multiple ways that it presents itself. The most common type is what we call generalized anxiety. And that's where you worry constantly about many, many things: school, family, health, future. We think of the worst, we catastrophize. Your kids have physical problems, they have stomach aches, headaches, nausea, they don't want to go to school. And they know it's easiest if they tell you that their belly hurts or they have a headache, rather than tell you they're afraid of, not performing well or something like that. So generalized anxiety kind of is the big umbrella overall anxiety. The other main types include OCD, which is obsessive compulsive disorder, where a child may have unwanted thoughts and behaviors. The obsessive is the thinking part, the compulsive is the behavior part. So they may have fear of germs, and they think about germs everywhere, and the behavior is they're washing their hands constantly. They may have fear of, sometimes the fears are often irrational, but sometimes they have no rationality. They have fear of having to count everything to the number 1 or 10 or 11, and they count books and they count things around them. You may not even know that that's occurring. My daughter, for example, had the number 11 was in her head all the time when she was growing up. And so she'd have to look at books and count to 11. She'd have to see people and count to 11. And it's a form of anxiety that kids try to control by providing some form of control for themselves. If they fear germs, they're going to wash their hands repetitively, thinking they're going to get it out. But sometimes it's dangerous. We have kids and adults who wash their hands to the point that their hands are raw. And so they have to stop. Or they pick their hair out. It's another kind of disorder, trichotillomania, but they start picking their hair, and before they know it, they're picking all their hair out, and they're having bald spots, or picking their skin. So it could be pretty serious, I guess, is the point. Another form of anxiety is separation anxiety. Get anxious and upset when parted from their parents. Kids with separation anxiety refuse to go to school. They don't go to camp. They don't go to sleepovers. They don't have play dates with their friends. Another form of anxiety are phobias, which are over-exaggerated, intense fear of things that seem irrational, like fear of planes, as I said, heights, open spaces, going over bridges. And when somebody who has a phobia begins to approach that, they go into literally a panic. It's a panic disorder of sorts, and it's disabling. Social anxiety, which is a little bit more than just casual shyness. It means feeling isolated, withdrawn, not wanting to be around other people, and really just feeling incredibly scared of being in the presence of other kids. As I said, panic attacks, which are I think the most disabling of all the anxiety, uh, forms it takes. And it is disabling. There's this feeling of sudden terror. And what most people with panic do is they avoid the situation. So for example, if you are panic about going on an airplane, you don't go. And there's a problem to that because by not going, you suddenly feel better. Okay, so if I'm ready to go on a plane, I'm too scared. I say, look, I can't go. I'm not going on the plane. And I turn around and I leave the airport. Now I feel better. But what it's done is actually strengthen the panic and the fear, because next time I'm going to do that, I'm going to be even more fearful. And I know that the best way to cope with that in my mind is to back off and not do it. So that's not a good, as therapists, we work with people to try to break that negative kind of pattern. The common thread for most of this is it's a result of unrealistic thinking. It's a result of this catastrophic black or white thinking, all or none thinking. Whenever we hear ourselves in an anxiety situation, thinking words like never, have to, always, like I'm always going to do this, or it's never going to work well, we know that we're dealing with this black and white thinking that we have to work at changing. So what makes some kids more vulnerable to anxiety? Why do some kids have it and some anxiety? When I say anxiety in this way, I'm talking about problematic anxiety. First, there are biological and genetic factors. There's brain wiring for anxiety. When a child comes to see me, the first thing I say is with anxiety, I say, who in your family has anxiety? And almost all the time, they can identify somebody else, one of their parents, or one of their close relatives or siblings who have anxiety. And there's a form of it, whether it's by combination of biological and psychologically, it's transferred to our kids. There are just psychological factors that some kids are just born with a temperament or a certain brain chemicals that are more persistent and will cause that kind of feeling, those physical feelings of anxiety. There are environmental factors. Primarily, I think it's anxious parenting. If we have parents who are anxious, who have experienced anxiety, who worry about their kids and express that worry or show that very clearly, kids will pick up on that. Okay, so, and when the kids pick up on that, they're going to say, must be something out there. I mean, they don't put it together in this way, but there must be something out there that there is to be afraid of. And they begin to go into this vicious cycle that I said. The other thing which causes anxiety is early childhood trauma. There's a well-known study by Kaiser called ACE studies, which are adverse childhood experiences. And kids with trauma have high levels of anxiety, as well as other issues like depression and substance abuse. So trauma in early life is another factor which causes it. And the reason I say that is because we have to understand these things if we want to help and treat them. So with that, what can be done to help all this? So the first thing is, maybe the first is this. I'm going to put one more slide on here. Let me see if I can do this. Share screen. Okay, so the first is key to communication. Talk to so your kids will listen. Listen so your kids will talk. And we have a parent chat group, by the way. I'm going to get out of that, which we run with South Bay Families Connected. And I realized yesterday in talking to them, the key to almost all problems we deal with our kids is communication and dialogue. So that's pretty not simplistic. It's kind of simple, but not easy. But being able to talk so your children will listen and listen so your children will talk is the foundation for dealing with most problems. Now that sounds simple, but there's a well-known study by Dr. Glenn. He asked kids, who would you most like to speak to if you had a problem? And the overwhelming majority of those kids said, I'd like to speak to my parents or another adult. Then they asked the same kids, when you have a problem, who do you speak to? And the overwhelming majority of those kids said, a friend. And when they would queried, why they didn't speak to their parents, they didn't feel heard, they didn't feel listened to. So when they had problems, they were going to someone else just as troubled as they were to help them with those problems. So we need to be able to get through that and learn how to, as I say, talk so our kids will listen and listen so your kids will talk. Uh, Something else. Next, then, what else to do with your child who may have anxious feelings? Totally essential to accept what they feel is real. Don't judge them. Don't minimize. Don't tell them. Don't worry about it. It'll be okay. Just relax. You know, those. And I'm going to get a little more into that in a little bit. But those kinds of discussions with them are not helpful at all. What it does is generally make a child feel more anxious, or it will make them feel depressed. And they won't tell you that. They will close up. They will tell themselves they were wrong for feeling what they're feeling. And then they'll just keep it to themselves, which will just kind of inside grow into more of a bigger mountain inside of anxiety inside them. So it's really important to not judge, not minimize, and not try to pressure your child to feel a different way. Rather than, well, I'll get to some specific things you can actually say to your kids in order to do that. But when in doubt, and this again came up yesterday, when in doubt and your child is talking about some difficulties and problems, it's really beneficial to just say, tell me a little bit more about that. Tell me about what you're feeling. Tell me more about how that is affecting you. You know, no judgment and no attempt to try to have an agenda of moving them one form or another. Something else we can work on is, you know, basically changing this what if thinking, changing this negative thinking, learning how to change what if, as I said earlier, to what is. Change it. I tell people to change one letter. Instead of if, make it is. What is means allows you to think about what's happening, to not go off into the future, to control what you can, and we can teach a child to reframe a situation if they're in the present. In other words, to see it a different way. It's hard to see something in the future that hasn't occurred in a different way, but it's much easier to see things in the present in a different way. This is a difficult one, the next point. Don't avoid situations which cause anxiety. As I said earlier, when we try to run away from the anxiety, it reinforces the anxiety more strongly. So what we have to do is try to practice very gradual and protected exposure. Maybe use the example if a child was anxious about going in the water, you wouldn't take them and throw them in the deep end, of course. But you also, if you say, okay, we will never go in the water, we won't go to the beach, we won't go to the pool, then that's going to make that anxiety about that even stronger. And what most of us would do is, you know, put your toe in the water for a day, and the next day put 2 toes in the water, and the next day go up to your ankles, and you get the point, and so on, until they begin to feel comfortable and less afraid. So we practice gradual and protected exposure, encouraging kids to take small steps forward. And if needed, if it gets too severe and too serious, it's important to get professional help because, as I said earlier, it is a very treatable problem. Another thing we have to understand is that we can't protect our kids from all anxiety. In fact, if you try to protect them from all their problems and all their anxiety, they wind up being more anxious. What we can do is teach our kids to manage their anxiety. And that's much more important than trying to help avoid the situations which cause them anxiety. We need to understand, as I said earlier, the relation between the stressor, the thinking, and the physical feelings. And some of the things that are essential to reducing anxiety are practicing mindfulness. Kids in mindfulness have a great benefit. It's easy to do. There's lots of apps available, Calm, Headspace, you know, and your kids are used to that digital interaction and will like that. Exercise is essential, and when I say exercise for kids, it's just being outside, taking a walk, playing, running a bit. Reducing caffeine, and that means primarily in their drinks that they take. If a child is experiencing anxiety, the less caffeine they have, the better it is. Experiencing good sleep and good sleep hygiene, making sure your child gets a good night's sleep, and there are things you can do to help improve and increase that. Eating healthy meals. Plenty of water is important for a child who's experiencing anxiety. They need downtime to decompress, kind of come down in general. And then, as I said earlier, if needed, professional help, which could include medication, because what we want to do is break the cycle. go back to that. If a child is anxious about going to a social situation, you've tried a lot of things and they still feel this tremendous amount of anxiety and have physical symptoms. If they're given medication by a child psychiatrist, they'll break that cycle. They'll start being able to think a little bit more clear, being able to take a little bit further steps. And again, instead of a downward spiral, it'll be an upward spiral of improvement. Some other things which are helpful is distracting yourself, listening to music, writing in a journal, doing some physical activities. If your child is feeling anxiety, depending what it is, you can ask them to personalize it and externalize it. By basically, we tell kids, give your anxiety a name and draw a picture of it. And in that way, they start having a relationship with it that they feel a little more in control of. And it lets them feel like they're the boss of their anxiety rather than the other way. At the end of the day, work with your children. This is in general, I think, good practice, but what I call practice the rule of 3 good things, which is for yourself and your children, go around and say, what are 3 good things that happened to me? And, today. And they don't have to be big things. They could just be things that were positive for them. But the ability to understand and see that lowers their anxiety, but also the sense of gratitude is a very positive factor in just general well-being, and it helps keep things in perspective. During this period, during the pandemic, I think it's important as parents that we take our foot off the gas. And remember, we're in a pandemic, and I know parents are trying to normalize everything for their children and keep things as they were. And some of that is really important, but it's just as important to know that we can't overwhelm our kids at this time. It's okay that they're not going to fall behind terribly. They're not going to have huge difficulties because of this. Everybody's going through the same thing, but we have to keep all of this in perspective and not overwhelm them. We have to be creative and find safe and new ways to socialize. And if they're anxious about going to school or anxious about going to camp or seeing friends, think about, how do I go and make that anxiety less for them? Maybe I take them, I'll tell you my own experience. One of my most anxious experiences when I've tested since then, haven't had the problem, but the first time I had to testify in court as an expert witness, I was scared. I thought, I'm going to be sitting up there and they're all going to be looking and they're going to be pounding the attorney and asking me these questions. And I built this whole what if in my head. What I did, which I thought turned out great, is I went to the courthouse the day before and I looked and I got a feel for it. And by doing that, it reduced my anxiety tremendously. And now, because I've done it numbers of times, it's not anxiety producing at all. So if your child has some new experience and there's some way to introduce them a little bit beforehand, that will reduce their anxiety. We have to deal with, as parents, as the main adults that they go to, with our own anxieties. And if you're feeling anxious, if you're having problems, if you're not handling your anxiety well, you have to figure out a way to help yourself, because your children will pick up from you. They, what you model for them is much more important than what you actually say to them. So, and then, as I said earlier, we need to talk to them in a certain way. And let me throw this last slide up 1 second here. Hold on. So if you're talking to your kids about anxiety, instead of saying calm down or don't worry or things like that, say, as I said, try I'm here with you. Or instead of saying there's nothing to be anxious about, try this. Is there anything I can do to help you right now? Instead of telling them logically, that's never going to happen, right? Just listen to them, let them talk it out, let them tell you what they're feeling. Things like you need to relax or it's all in your head. When we tell people that, that's very, like I said, unproductive. And instead just say, do you want to talk about it? Can we discuss what you're going through? So it's basically accepting and not minimizing what they are feeling. Oops. And so, as I said earlier, the bad news is there's a ton of anxiety throughout our society. But the good news is most kids get through it well, number one, and number two, it is very treatable. Uh, we'll get through this in terms of the pandemic. This too shall pass. And the most important thing, and I know lots of people who have this, is, there's a lot of people who are thriving rather than just surviving through this. And, learning certain skills and working with your kids in that way will turn this into a positive experience rather than a negative one. So I thank you for your time. Take it. Are there any questions at all? Do we have, or we could?
There is one question in the chat box. Can you read it? Do you need me to read it?
I need you to read it because I don't see the chat.
Someone asked, what if they refuse to tell you more and instead shut down and refuse to talk?
Great question. And that's probably what's going to happen. Okay, so, and it depends, and a lot of this is age related, but either way, it all works the same. And that is, we need to be able to anticipate what our children are feeling. And when they're not going to speak, we need to do what's called reflective listening. So if you approach them and say, would you like to tell me more? And they just clam up, you ask yourself in your mind, what are they telling? What do I think is going on? I think they're scared. I think they're depressed. I think they're sad, whatever it is. And then we reflect that to them and say, I understand it might be hard for you to do this, or it might be scary for you to talk about this, and that's okay. And they may not say a word back to you, but if we reflect to them and validate to them what they're feeling, they will hear it, they will get it, it will sink in, and it will be ultimately be beneficial. So especially with little kids, when I say little, 5, 6, 7, it's really not that important that they respond back to you. What is important is that you reflect their feelings to them, and then you validate their feelings. So if you said to your child, look, it sounds like you're really afraid of going to see, sleepover at so-and-so's house. And so that's the reflective part. And then the validating part is, I can understand why you feel that way, okay? It makes sense. It's a new situation. It's somebody you don't know very well. It's a new home. And I understand why you're feeling scared. And that will get through. They don't have to say anything. They will hear you. They will trust that you understand them. And that ultimately that will build into their ability to talk to you at some point.
We have another question.
Okay.
What kind of impact does puberty have?
What have?
Puberty.
Well, I think it's got a number of impacts. One is the physical aspects, the hormonal and the physiological changes that kids go through, the different brain development that they go through makes their stressors much different, makes their, they begin having feelings and drives inside them without having the capacity brain-wise to understand, to have better judgmental thinking. So there's these clashes between inner drives and the ability to think properly. So that's one. And then the other is, in puberty also, just the stressors in their lives begin to change, as they come to that age, and the things that they're coping with suddenly become different, and it's new, and again, a whole different area to things that have to do with friends and school and success and future and those kinds of things. So yeah, it has a big impact.
And parent wanted to know, if they do not want to talk, should you follow up later?
Yes, I think you can, again, always respect where they're at, and later say, I just want to check with you again. Is there anything that's going on that about what I mentioned earlier? And and again, as much as you can, reflect to them what you think they're going through. But what's really important, I think, is if your child isn't ready to talk, then respect them and leave them for that time. But just let them know that you understand them. Trying to help a child that doesn't want to help, I call it help not asked for is criticism. So if your child is not asking for solutions and help, then don't don't do so.
Here's another question. What if they use gaming as a form of escape? And they want to know, is that dangerous? And the parents shared that they often have a different persona online or on social mediums.
Yeah, great question. And, I think the answer is maybe, meaning, is it, like most things, everything has to do with degree. And in moderation, being able to blow off a little steam or find some other part of yourself to express is probably not a big deal at all. But again, in moderation. But things in extreme are, if you escape into, the world of gaming, then, it can become, and we've seen it become a really addictive issue, an addictive process. And, that's where the danger lies. So when it's used as a form of relaxation for a bit and just a time out from stress, I think it's positive. When it's used as a form of escape and attempt to rearrange one's life to be feeling a different way all the time, then it becomes potentially very dangerous.
Hey, anybody else? Any more questions?
Somebody could unmute themselves if they want. We have a small enough group, I think, that somebody can actually ask if they'd like.
Yeah, feel free to unmute if you'd like to talk.
If
No?
not,
Okay.
well, wait. Oh, I see something in the chat.
Oh, there is something there. So how do you restrict or impose guidelines on gaming?
I'm chuckling because, it's kind of like I said earlier, I run the parent chat group. We've been doing it for 3 years, and things have changed since the pandemic, the kind of issues. But originally, gaming was one of the main, social media and gaming. This question comes up all the time, and I think it is very, very difficult. For those of you who have very little children, that's the time to start. Before you let the genie out of the bottle. I think it's much easier to put limits and control what your child does in regards to gaming when they're small before they get into it. Later in life, it gets very difficult. I got to be honest. So I think it's the same. Go back to dialogue, talking, expressing how you feel, letting your child know, and then learning how to set limits, consequences, and follow through. If your child hasn't flipped over into the addictive gaming, that requires a whole different kind of help. But if your child is not in that place, then you're going to have to painfully put in some limits and have consequences and follow through with them. And it's a lot of work. It's an awful lot of work because the gaming allows them to be kind of busy for a little bit, but trying to break that pattern means that you have to work with that constantly and have a lot of stress and friction, but it's doable and it's necessary.
And one parent asked about the parent chats, and I just directed in the South Bay Families Connected website, right?
Exactly.
Okay.
Go to that website. It's every Monday at 10 o'clock, and it's been great for 3 years, as I say.
Okay, another question.
I could read it. So
okay.
I just figured out how to do it. My son is 12, and we limit, monitor, and have since first starting. Currently, the pushback is because it's social and his only connection to friends. How much is too much given the pandemic? I've thought that's a great question, and I've thought about that. It's like on one hand, before the pandemic, we were talking about reining in their social interaction, social media interaction, and now that's all they have. And I think I'm not sure the answer to that. I'm going to go back to what I said earlier is on some level we have to take our foot off the gas a little bit, have to recognize that, that's what our kids have. That's the best that we can do. And we're just going to have to look a little more carefully and make sure it doesn't get into this all-consuming everything, and also maybe now I think of it, what form it takes. Being on social media and talking to their friends and interacting is one thing. Gaming and taking on different personas and violent kind of gaming, and being immersed in that, that's not really interaction. That's not really social. Even though there's somebody else on the other line that they might be playing with, that's not a positive social interaction. So I think you still need to kind of look and try to limit that kind of activity. But yes, there, in the old days we'd say, oh, don't spend so much time on the computer, get out and go see your friends or go do things, or let me drive you to this or that activity. We don't have that as much anymore. So we have to take our foot off the gas a little and allow them more space and more leeway. But at the same time, still be looking at what part of that is not helpful.
Anyone want to unmute and ask any questions? We still have a little time. Nope.
Well, this has been
Hi.
great.
Oh, you know what? I'm so sorry. I have a quick question. My name is Angela.
Hi, Angela.
So my question is, schoolwork is a lot these days, being at home with all the classes for a ninth grader, new high school and everything. She does have anxiety about finishing schoolwork and getting it in. And we had some major computer issues where Google Docs was erasing all of her work that was going into class. So now it's been anxiety driven, that we have to finish some of the work. At what point can we just tell her that, stop doing what you're doing, stop working, stop doing homework, move on, get outside, versus, and I don't know if policies of schools and stuff, because we're talking to teachers right now and dealing with all that. But she's behind in every single class. Mm-hmm. And she went into high school as an A student. And now the anxiety that she has gotten from this whole scenario has been debilitating for her. Mm-hmm. And she has huge triggers on certain classes. So I guess my question is just, when do we tell her that she needs to stop doing what she's doing? Like for schoolwork, and just move on.
Right. Well, I think the first step is, and you've probably done all this, so I apologize if I'm saying the obvious, but is to try to sit with her and like I said, dialogue and get her to talk about what is it that she's worried about, and what is she concerned about. And if she can do that to some level, maybe we can kind of help her reframe how she sees it, and see it a little bit differently, because our feelings are connected to how we think. And so when you say move on or whatever, we can't have her say, look, don't feel anxious, don't feel worried. Can't do that. What we can try to do is try to get a little bit beneath that and try to find out what are those things that she is creating in her head that she's worried about. Not what grade is she in, by the way? 9th. Okay. Well, I don't know what it is, but I'm not going to do well. I'm going to fail. I'm going to be left behind. I mean, I don't know exactly what she's worried about, but she's got worries in her head that if she can in any way start talking about those a little, then maybe you can help her see that a little different. Like everybody's going through it, or don't. In other words, to try to, you can't say it's going to be all okay, because we can't say we basically have to try to dilute her thinking a little bit. And as soon as she starts reframing it in any degree, she will start feeling differently. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. And again, not easy. And if it's really going down the road of, it doesn't look like it's getting better, then you might, sometimes it's good for her to have somebody to talk to, that you can sit and, counseling person and go through this without, as a child with their parent sometimes feels like they have to not impress them, but there's a counselor won't have an agenda with them other than to try to make them feel better and see it differently. So if it gets too serious, it's probably not a bad idea to just kind of try to nip it in the bud.
We have an appointment scheduled for today, and it was a bit of a struggle to get her to accept talking to somebody else. Mm-hmm. But is there something I can say to her to make her feel at ease, because I know she's feeling anxiety about her 1 o'clock appointment.
Yeah, I would say, look, say, go try it a few times. It's totally confidential. It's just between you and her. It doesn't mean that you're sick. It doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you. It's an opportunity to have somebody who knows how to help with these situations, maybe provide a little bit of advice for you. And if it's helpful, great. And if it's not, after you try it 3 times, you and I will sit and we'll talk. And if you don't want to go back, you don't have to.
Okay.
But I would most important would be to destigmatize it, to not make it like there's something wrong with her and she needs to be fixed. That it's just another person who's able to help because they just know how to handle these kinds of things. And because what kids generally find is that same anxiety issue. They've built this thing up in their head, and then when they go in, they have another caring person who's nice and who's understanding and is not judgmental, and they really like it generally.
Oh, good. All right, thank you.
Sure.
You have another question in the chat box.
Okay, let me see. No, I don't see it. So go ahead, read it.
How can you encourage your kids to be engaged in school when everything they liked about school, friends, recess, social interaction, have been removed? Yikes.
I think again, I don't know. I applaud you parents for dealing with it. Unfortunately, my kids are beyond school age. But I applaud you for having to cope with that exact question. And the answer is you do your best. I mean, I know it sounds trite, but you again, dialogue with your child, let them know that you understand, validate what they're feeling, reinforce that what they're feeling, and basically let them know that try to be creative in. I mean, here's the opportunity. If they can talk to you about the things they don't have, my friends, my extracurricular activities, my sports, and I'm missing these things. So, many of them they can't do, but you and they can hopefully get creative and say, okay, what substitute can we have on a temporary basis that will provide, I mean, you wouldn't talk this way to them, but you'd think, how can we provide you those feelings and those interactions as substitutes, not perfect substitutes, but somewhat substitute for what they had, for what you're looking for. And then you have to get creative to try to bring that to them as best as possible. But it starts with, as I say, really understanding what they are experiencing, recognizing that what they're experiencing comes from what they're thinking, and then trying to help them see things differently. That's the key to much of this, is being able to reframe how they're seeing things and see it in a little bit of a different way, and they'll start feeling a little different.
Great. Great. Yes, thank you, Dr. Gelbart. That was really helpful.
Well, thank you all. I appreciate you all being here, and like I said, this is an opportunity to thrive during this situation. Many if not most of you will come out with a lot, kind of bend but not break syndrome.